Three clocks, military, economic, technological, all converging on the same point. In part 1, I showed you what changed between two fishing boats, the one in 2010 and the one in January 2026. I showed you three forces underneath that crisis: a military buildup with no margin for error, an economy pressuring China to act before its window closes, and a technology shift transferring leverage from Beijing to Tokyo. Now I'm going to show you what happens when they collide. Year by year, all the way to 2029, and then a fork. Two futures, let's begin. By December 2026, this crisis has not resolved. It has hardened into a permanent condition. Every past escalation between Japan and China has ratcheted tensions to a new floor that never recovers. CSIS has documented this pattern going back decades. This time follows the pattern, but the floor is lower than it has ever been. Japan's defense budget clears $60 billion. Tomahawks are operationally deployed in Kyushu. The rare earth restrictions from China prove partially symbolic. Some materials continue flowing, but the signal is structural. And Japanese companies begin accelerating their exit from Chinese supply chains, not because of ideology, because every boardroom in Tokyo has run the scenario: what happens if the Taiwan Strait closes tomorrow? The answer is always unacceptable losses, so the migration begins. But something is happening beneath the three clocks that I did not show you in part 1. It is the force that will determine whether the clocks produce a controlled detonation or an uncontrolled one. Inside Japan, Takaichi's approval starts to erode, not because the public disagrees with her, because the economic cost of the China confrontation starts arriving. Rare earth disruptions hit auto manufacturers. The business lobby, Toyota, Panasonic, SoftBank, pushes back through faction meetings and donor conversations. Japan looks unified from the outside. From the inside, it is being pulled between a security establishment that sees an existential threat and a business establishment that sees an existential risk from overreaction. Inside China, something more dangerous. Xi Jinping has spent a decade cultivating hyper-nationalism through education, through social media, through a national identity built around humiliation and rejuvenation. That nationalism was a tool. By 2026, the tool has become a constraint. Chinese social media does not wait for government direction, it demands action. Chairman Xi built a tiger, and the tiger does not accept the rider's schedule. 2027 is when the technology clock becomes the loudest sound in the room. Japan's Rapidus project hits its target, a working 2-nanometer semiconductor prototype. The chip is not in mass production yet. TSMC still controls 70% of the global foundry market. But the point was never market share, the point is resilience. And what the prototype proves is the thing that changes everything. Advanced chips can be made outside Taiwan. For 20 years, the implicit logic of the Taiwan Strait has been, China cannot invade because destroying TSMC craters the global economy. Taiwan's chip monopoly was not just an economic asset, it was a deterrent, the silicon shield. Rapidus cracks the shield not by replacing TSMC, by proving it can be replaced, and the moment that proof exists, Beijing's window, the period during which seizing Taiwan gives China a chokehold on the world's chip supply, starts closing. Meanwhile, Xi's military purges have created a paradox. He is more powerful than ever and more isolated. Experienced commanders are gone, replaced by loyalists. The quality of information flowing to the decision maker matters more in a crisis than any other variable, and Xi has systematically degraded the quality of his own information supply. With this many forces packed into this little maritime space, Japanese interceptors, Chinese Coast Guard, American carrier groups, Taiwanese patrols, the probability of an unplanned incident is no longer theoretical. It is statistical. The clock does not need a decision to reach zero, it just needs a mistake. I told you to remember that. By 2028, the economic decoupling is measurable fact. Japan's rare earth imports from China have dropped below 40%. Deep-sea mining pilots in Japan's Pacific waters are producing results. The lever China pulled in 2010 and again in 2026 has done exactly what the technology clock predicted. Accelerated the very diversification it was meant to prevent. The weapon is close to empty. The alliance architecture has solidified. Japan, UK, Italy fighter program and development quad coordination with Australia and the Philippines fully operational. South Korea's trilateral cooperation with the United States and Japan barely functional in 2023, now a pillar of regional security. The functional architecture of containment, even if nobody calls it that. China's economy faces its defining test, Property crisis unresolved, deflation persistent. The lost decade comparison, the Japan comparison, unavoidable. I told you in part 1 that the economic clock creates two simultaneous pressures. The incentive to point outward goes up while the capacity to sustain a confrontation goes down. By 2028, both pressures are at their peak. And then Taiwan detonates. Taiwan's 2028 presidential election produces a result that maximizes instability for everyone. The KMT wins. Not because Taiwanese people want reunification, 90% still have unfavorable views of China. The KMT wins because 4 years of cross-strait tension have damaged the economy, and voters want the candidate who promises to lower the temperature. Here is the number that explains everything. 52% of Taiwanese adults prefer independence, but only 16% support it if it risks war. That gap between what people want and what they will risk is the most important political fact in the Western Pacific. And the 2028 election is that gap made manifest. Beijing reads the KMT victory as vindication, squeeze long enough and Taiwan accommodates. Tokyo reads it as a disaster. The deterrence architecture Japan anchored its entire transformation around is fracturing. Washington reads it as a headache. You cannot oppose a democratic election in your most important Asian partner. 3 capitals, 3 interpretations. All correct, none compatible. Everything up to this point has been structural, measurable, trackable, defense budgets, trade data, chip timelines, patrol logs. But 2029 is where the story forks. And the variable that determines which path we take is not a policy decision, it is not an election, it is an accident. Scenario A, deterrence holds. In Scenario A, the accident does not happen. Every near miss is resolved by commanders who choose de-escalation in the 90 seconds they have to decide. The combined military posture makes the cost prohibitive for Xi. Economy struggling, military leadership purged, risk of catastrophic failure too high. Taiwan's KMT government offers just enough dialogue to give Xi a face-saving alternative to force, and the technology shift continues eroding Beijing's rationale. Every year rapid as advances, the silicon shield matters less. Scenario A is not peace, it is a new Cold War, permanent tension, deepening decoupling, an arms race absorbing trillions. Crises that spike and subside, never quite tipping into war. It is stable, it is expensive, and it is the better outcome. Scenario B, the mistake. In Scenario B, the accident happens, and it begins the way these things always begin. Not with a missile, with a fishing boat. A Chinese vessel enters contested waters near the Senkakus. A Japanese cutter orders it back. A Chinese Coast Guard ship intervenes. 300 meters apart, both captains understanding orders not to retreat. What happens next takes less than 4 minutes. A collision, a warning shot, a radar lock misinterpreted as weapons engagement. Both chains of command receive the same report, hostile action by the other side. Chairman Xi receives this report in a room full of people he promoted because they agree with him. The experienced commanders who might have counseled restraint are gone. Outside that room, Chinese social media has already ignited. The Senkakus, islands every Chinese citizen was taught since childhood belonged to China, are framed as under Japanese attack. The demand for retaliation is not manufactured. It is genuine. It comes from the population Xi built. The instrument of control becomes the constraint on control. The tiger does not wait for the rider's command. Xi cannot back down. Not because escalation is rational, because the nationalist infrastructure he constructed will not permit retreat. In Tokyo, Takaichi faces the mirror image. She said, in parliament on camera, that a threat to Taiwan constitutes a threat to Japan's survival. The Senkaku incident is not Taiwan, but it is the same theater, the same adversary, the same logic. If she does not respond, the doctrine she built her premiership on collapses. A threat to Japan's survival. The phrase comes back, just like I told you it would. Neither leader can retreat, not because they are irrational, because the systems they built have eliminated retreat as an option. China announces an exclusion zone. Japan refuses to recognize it. The United States deploys under treaty obligation. Within 72 hours, the most heavily armed body of water on Earth has become a blockade. Scenario B does not require a madman. It requires exactly 3 compressed decision-making timelines, incomplete information, and leaders who have locked themselves into positions they cannot retreat from without being destroyed. That is not a hypothetical future. That is a description of the present. We started with a fishing boat. I've spent 23 minutes across 2 videos building that frame. Now I'm going to break it. The fishing boat was never the story. The story is the space between 2 fishing boats. 2010 and 2026, 16 years. And in those 16 years, every system that was supposed to prevent this, economic interdependence, institutional dialogue, the assumption that rational actors choose restraint, has been weakened, hollowed out, or deliberately dismantled. In 2010, China cut rare earths and Japan had no alternative. In 2026, China cut rare earths and Japan had been preparing for 15 years. Same weapon, completely different outcome in 2010. Japan's defense budget was under 40 billion and its constitution prohibited collective self-defense. In 2026, the budget is approaching 60 billion. Japan is deploying offensive missiles for the first time since 1945, and its prime minister has publicly stated when Japan might go to war. China's leverage over Japan peaked somewhere between 5 and 8 years ago. It has been declining since. The rare earth weapon delivers less impact every time. The economic interdependence is unwinding, and Japan's dominance in semiconductor equipment gives it counter-leverage that China cannot replicate, cannot work around, and cannot buy. What we are watching is a structural inversion of leverage. Japan is moving from economically dependent on China to technologically indispensable to the entire Western deterrence coalition. That transformation happens once in a generation, and it is happening while China faces the most sustained economic pressure of the post-reform era. The fishing boat was never about fish. It was the first tremor of 2 tectonic plates grinding against each other for decades. And the only question that matters is whether the structures being built right now, the alliances, the deterrence, the supply chains, the fallbacks, are strong enough to absorb the shocks. Because the clocks are still ticking, and they do not care whether we are ready. I'm Shiv, and this is the Planck scale. Scenario A or Scenario B? Which future are we headed toward? And what's the one variable you think I'm underweighting? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. If this changed how you see this part of the world, subscribe. The next one is going to apply the same framework to the flashpoint nobody is running the simulation on. You'll know which one I mean when you see it. The clocks are still ticking. I'll see you when they do.